The warning lights flashed red across the bridge of the Earthship Valiant. Jake Morrison looked at his screen and felt his heart beat faster. A distress signal was coming from deep space, and it had been repeating for 3 whole days. Captain Helen Briggs walked to the center of the bridge. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed concern. She had been commanding ships for 15 years, but this was different. This was a call for help from an alien species. "What do we know about this signal?" Helen asked. Jake pulled up the information on the main screen. "It's from the Velan Republic. They're the friendly traders who visited Earth 2 years ago. Someone is attacking them. They're asking anyone who can hear them to please send help." Helen remembered the Velans. They were gentle people who loved science and art. They had helped humans improve their space engines. They had shared food and stories. Now they were in trouble. "Who's attacking them?" Helen asked. "An empire called the Korthax Dominion. According to the message, they've already invaded 4 Velan colony worlds. The Velans don't have much of a military. They're asking for help from anyone." Lily Crawford, the young communications officer, looked up from her station. "Captain, I just got word from Earth Command. Admiral Pierce says we can respond. We need to meet the rest of the Second Fleet at Kepler Station in 2 days." Helen took a deep breath. The Valiant had been exploring the outer edges of human space for months. They had met other aliens, made friends, learned about the galaxy. But they had never fought anyone. Humans had been in space for only 5 years. They were still the new kids. "Tell all departments to get ready for combat," Helen ordered. "Jake, set our course for Kepler Station. Full speed." "Yes, Captain," Jake said, entering the commands. As the Valiant's engines pushed them forward, Jake thought about what was coming. Humans had trained for war in space, but it had always been practice. Every drill, every simulation had been against pretend enemies. Now they were going to fight real aliens. Earth was different from most planets in the galaxy. Scientists called it a deathworld. Everything about Earth was harder, more dangerous than other civilized planets. The gravity was stronger, making humans tougher. The weather was wild and unpredictable. Even the plants and animals were designed to kill. Humans had evolved by surviving all of this. But would that be enough against an empire that ruled the stars? 2 days later, the Valiant arrived at Kepler Station. What Jake saw through the windows made him forget to breathe. 73 warships were waiting in perfect formation. Every single one carried the symbol of the United Earth Defense Force. There were huge carriers, fast destroyers, small frigates, and assault ships built to land troops. All of them had weapons that humans had spent years designing. Admiral Richard Pierce appeared on the view screen. He was an old man with gray hair and tired eyes, but his voice was strong. "Captains, we have new information from the Velans. The Korthax Dominion thinks the Velans are easy targets. The Korthax attack from space first, destroying everything. Then they land soldiers to take over what's left. They've conquered 17 different species in the last 100 years. Helen leaned forward in her chair. "What do we know about how strong they are?" "Their ships are bigger than ours. They use energy shields and laser weapons. On the ground, they use robot fighters backed up by slave soldiers from the people they've already conquered. The Velans say the Korthax have never lost a war." Paul Fisher, the tactical officer, spoke quietly, but everyone heard him. 18 is not going to happen." Admiral Pierce smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "That's right, Commander. The Korthax don't know what a Deathworld species can do. They've never fought people who evolved in hell. Let's show them what happens when you threaten our friends." The entire fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives at the same time. Space twisted around them as they jumped toward the Velan home system. The journey would take 3 days. In the crew quarters of the Valiant, Marines were checking their equipment. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez ran her hands over her rifle. It was a simple weapon that shot metal bullets. Most aliens thought bullets were primitive. They used lasers and energy weapons, but Amy knew that bullets worked just fine. "You think they'll be ready for us, Sarge?" asked Danny Hughes. He was the youngest Marine in the squad, barely 20 years old. Amy smiled. "Danny, if the information is right, these Korthax have been bullying species that don't know how to fight. They're about to learn that humans invented war before we even had cities." In the medical bay, Dr. Christine Palmer was setting up emergency beds. She hoped she wouldn't need them, but she prepared for the worst. On the observation deck, Greg Matthews watched the stars fly past. He was just a weapons technician, a civilian contractor. He had volunteered to come on this mission because he wanted to help. Now he wondered if that had been a smart decision. 3 days passed. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velan system. What they saw made everyone angry. 3 Velan colonies were burning. Space stations had been blown apart. Floating above the 4th colony world were 27 Korthax warships. Their dark hulls were decorated with symbols of conquest. They looked like they owned the place. "All ships, prepare for battle." Admiral Pierce's voice rang out across every bridge in the fleet. Humanity has entered the war. On the Korthax flagship Eternal Conquest, Commander Zrathkor looked at his sensors. He saw the human fleet and laughed. 27 ships against 73 didn't worry him. The human ships were small. They looked weak. "Unknown vessels." Zrathkor sent a message in the common trade language. "You are interfering in a legal conquest. Leave now or we will destroy you." On the Valiant's bridge, Helen listened to the translation. "Jake, send our response." Jake had already typed it out. "Ready, Captain." The message that reached the Korthax fleet was in English with a translation attached. Admiral Pierce's voice was cold as ice. "Commander Zrathkor, this is Admiral Richard Pierce of the United Earth Defense Force. The Velan Republic has asked us for help. We are giving it. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and leave Velan space. If you fire on our ships or hurt any more Valans, we will consider it an act of war. Choose carefully." Zrathkor's head twitched in amusement. "Humans, we have no record of your species. Your ships are small and weak. If you don't leave, we will conquer your homeworld too." 30 seconds passed in silence. Then a Korthax destroyer fired a warning shot across the front of a human frigate. "All ships." Admiral Pierce's voice was colder than space itself. "Open fire. Show them what humans do to bullies." The battle began with a wave of missiles that shocked the Korthax. Human ships didn't just use energy weapons. They fired thousands of missiles, each one tracking its target with computers that never missed. The Korthax shields were designed to stop lasers, not physical impacts. "Take evasive action!" Zrathkor screamed as 3 missiles hit his flagship's shields. Each impact made the shields flicker and weaken. The human ships moved like dancers. Pilots who had learned to fly in Earth's atmosphere knew how to think in 3 dimensions. The Valiant rolled under a Korthax cruiser and fired its railguns. The metal slugs punched through the enemy's shields before they could adjust. "Direct hit on their engine room," Jake reported. "They're leaking air." All across the battlefield, the same thing was happening. The Korthax had fewer ships but thought their technology would win. Instead, they faced an enemy that fought with a fury they had never seen. Human weapons had backups for the backups. If energy weapons failed, they used missiles. If missiles were stopped, they used railguns. If railguns didn't work, they simply rammed. The destroyer called Hammer showed this perfectly. Captain Kevin Brandt's ship took heavy damage. Systems were failing. He made a decision that would horrify the Korthax. He aimed his ship at a Korthax battlecruiser and pushed the engines to maximum. "All crew abandon ship," Kevin ordered calmly. "Escape pods launch in 30 seconds. The crew ran to the escape pods. Kevin was the last person on board. He climbed into his command pod and ejected, just as the Hammer hit the Korthax battlecruiser at incredible speed. The explosion lit up space like a small sun. "Sir?" Zrathkor's officer said, his voice shaking. "They destroyed one of our battlecruisers by crashing into it. On purpose." "What kind of species does this?" "A desperate one," Zrathkor said, but he didn't sound sure anymore. The battle lasted 2 hours. The human fleet worked together like they had been doing this for centuries. They protected each other, moved damaged ships to safety, and attacked without mercy. When the Korthax finally tried to run away, they had lost 11 ships. The humans had lost 3, with 7 more damaged but still able to fight. "All ships chase them," Admiral Pierce ordered. "Don't let them regroup. We end this now." But something changed. The Korthax ships weren't running away into deep space. They were heading toward the 4th colony world, the one with Velan civilians still on it. "Admiral," Helen reported urgently. "They're moving into position to bomb the colony from orbit. They're going to use the civilians as hostages." Pierce's face went hard. "Not today. All assault ships prepare to land on the planet. We're taking this fight to the ground." The assault ship linebacker shook as it dropped through the atmosphere. Inside, Sergeant Amy Rodriguez held onto a support rail while her squad checked their weapons one last time. 500 Marines were packed into this ship alone, and there were 10 more assault ships right behind them. "Listen up," Amy shouted over the roar of re-entry. Intelligence says there are about 2,000 combat robots on the ground. They're supported by 500 slave soldiers. The robots are big, heavily armed, and programmed to kill. The slaves are people from worlds the Korthax already conquered. They probably don't want to die for their masters. What about the actual Korthax? Danny Hughes asked. He was gripping his rifle so tight his knuckles were white. About 100 officers and commanders. They let their robots do most of the fighting. That's about to become a big problem for them. The linebacker hit the ground hard. The landing thrusters scorched the pavement of what used to be a commercial district in the Valen colony. The rear ramp dropped before the ship had fully settled, and Amy led her squad out into a nightmare. The Valen colony looked like hell. Buildings were crushed into rubble. Fires burned everywhere, sending black smoke into the sky. In the distance, Amy could see the bug-like shapes of Korthax combat robots. They were advancing toward a civilian shelter, their plasma cannons glowing as they charged up. First squad with me, Amy ordered. Second and third set up a defensive line. Fourth squad, get those civilians back to the ship. The Marines moved fast and smooth. They had practiced this 1,000 times. Unlike the Korthax, who fought from a distance with their robots, humans understood urban warfare. They used the broken buildings for cover. They moved in small teams that supported each other. They used weapons that had been improved through thousands of years of human conflict. Private Lisa Morgan positioned herself behind a collapsed wall. She aimed her shoulder-mounted rocket launcher at the nearest combat robot. Target locked. Fire. The rocket screamed across the square and hit the robot right in its central processor. The machine exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. All around the battlefield, human Marines were destroying robots with weapons the Korthax had never expected. 3 kilometers away, in an underground command bunker, Korthax Ground Commander Threlvax watched his tactical display with growing panic. How are these primitive creatures destroying our robots so easily? His tactical officer was a reptilian slave from a conquered world. The slave looked at his master with barely hidden pleasure. Commander, the humans are not fighting like any species we have encountered before. They use explosives. They use ambush tactics. They fight at close range. Our robots were designed to fight enemies that stay far away and use energy weapons only. Then send the slave soldiers. Overwhelm the humans with numbers. The order went out across the battlefield, but it backfired in a way Threlvax never expected. Many of the slave soldiers had been forced to fight for years. They hated their Korthax masters. When they saw the humans winning, they saw an opportunity for freedom. Amy's squad encountered a group of 10 reptilian soldiers. She raised her rifle ready to fire, but the aliens immediately threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Please, their leader said through a translation device, we do not wish to fight you. We are Draxians. The Korthax enslaved us 5 years ago. They force us to fight or they kill our families. Amy lowered her rifle. We're not here to fight you. We're here to fight them. The Draxian soldiers' scales were covered in scars from Korthax punishment. The Korthax command bunker is 3 kilometers north. They are preparing to collapse the civilian tunnels. If they cannot win, they will kill everyone. You must hurry. Amy immediately sent this information up the command chain. Within minutes, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Harrison was putting together a strike team to assault the bunker. Other Marine units continued evacuating civilians from the underground shelters. The assault on the bunker was fast and brutal. Human combat engineers blew the reinforced doors open with shaped charges. Marine fire teams flooded inside, moving through the corridors with practiced efficiency. The Korthax officers had never been in personal danger before. They had always sent robots and slaves to fight for them. Now they were face to face with soldiers who had trained for exactly this kind of combat. Commander Threlvax tried to reach the self-destruct controls. He intended to blow up the bunker and take the attacking humans with him. But Danny Hughes had been watching the bunker's computer systems. He saw what Threlvax was trying to do and shot him before he could complete the command. Bunker secure, Colonel Harrison reported over the radio. All Korthax commanders are either captured or dead. The remaining slave soldiers are surrendering everywhere. On the Valiant, Captain Helen Briggs received the report with a smile of satisfaction. Admiral Pierce, ground operations are complete. The colony is secure. Excellent work, Captain. Now let's deal with the rest of their fleet. The remaining Korthax ships had retreated to the edge of the system. Their confidence was completely destroyed. The humans had eliminated their ground forces in less than 6 hours. Now the Korthax were sending messages requesting surrender terms. Admiral Pierce's response was simple and direct. You will give back all the territory you conquered. You will pay money to the Velan Republic to repair the damage you caused. You will give us information about any other aggressive empires in this region, and you will tell everyone you meet what happens when you attack humanity's allies. The Korthax agreed to every single term. 3 weeks later, the Velan Republic held a huge gathering on their homeworld. The Grand Hall on Vela Prime had been damaged in the Korthax attack, but the Velans had repaired it quickly. Representatives from 12 different species stood in groups, talking in quiet voices about the dramatic rescue. Captain Helen Briggs stood with Jake Morrison. Both were wearing their formal uniforms and feeling uncomfortable with all the attention. They had been invited as representatives of the human fleet, which was still in orbit making sure the Korthax kept their promises. Ambassador Trelevan of the Velan Republic approached them. His species was tall and thin, adapted to low gravity. Captain Briggs, Commander Morrison, my people cannot thank you enough. You saved millions of lives. Helen nodded politely. We were happy to help, Ambassador. The Velans were among the first to welcome humanity to the galaxy. We don't abandon our friends. Indeed, Trelevan said, and his voice carried wonder and fear at the same time. But I must admit, we did not fully understand what we were inviting when we first made contact with Earth. Your species is remarkable and terrifying in equal measure. Jake noticed other ambassadors moving closer, clearly wanting to hear this conversation. A representative from the Corellian Unity looked like an upright otter. He spoke nervously. Is it true that your homeworld has predators that hunt in packs, and that your oceans contain creatures large enough to sink ships? Well, yes, Helen admitted. Earth has quite a variety of dangerous animals, but humans are the top predators on our world. We didn't get to the top by being peaceful. A being made of crystal chimed in. Its voice sounded like music. We reviewed the battle recordings. Your tactics were extremely aggressive. You deliberately crashed a ship into an enemy vessel. Your soldiers fought robots at close range. This is not how civilized species fight wars. There was an awkward silence. Jake could feel the judgment in those words, but Helen just smiled. You're right. It's not how civilized species fight. It's how humans fight. And right now I'd say it worked pretty well. Admiral Pierce had joined them along with Amy Rodriguez. Amy had been awarded the Velan Star of Valor for her actions on the ground. The Admiral addressed all the assembled aliens with his usual bluntness. Let me explain something about humanity, Pierce said. Earth is what scientists call a death world. High gravity, violent weather, thousands of predatory species, diseases that kill millions. Humans evolved in an environment that tried to kill us every single day. We survived by being tough, smart, and willing to work together. Those traits don't disappear just because we made it to space. Ambassador Trelevan nodded slowly. The Korthax thought they were invincible because they had conquered 17 species. But those species came from gentle worlds. They had evolved with minimal competition and few predators. When faced with real violence, they had no experience to draw on. Exactly, Amy added. With respect to everyone here, most galactic species think of war as an unfortunate accident. Humans have been at war with something, whether nature, animals, or each other, for our entire existence. We know how to fight because we've never stopped fighting. A Draxian diplomat stepped forward. His scales bore the scars of slavery. Then we are fortunate that humans value friendship and honor. A species with your capabilities could easily become conquerors. Helen's expression grew serious. We could. But we've seen what conquest does to both the conquered and the conquerors. Humanity has a bloody history, Ambassador. We fought terrible wars among ourselves. We've done terrible things, but we've also learned from our mistakes. We came to space hoping to be better than our past. And you are, Trelevan said softly. You came when we called for help. Back in the hall, Ambassador Trelevan stood before the assembled representatives. His voice carried hope and determination. The Velan Republic proposes the formation of a mutual defense alliance with the United Earth government. We also invite any species who wishes to join. Together we can ensure that empires like the Korthax Dominion never threaten peaceful civilizations again. The room erupted in enthusiastic agreement. Species that had suffered under Korthax oppression were especially loud in their support. Within hours, the foundation of what would become the Allied Worlds Coalition had been laid. Earth would be its primary military power. Admiral Pierce found himself in a private room with military commanders from other species. A Corellian general named Shivral asked the question they all wanted answered. Admiral, your forces did magnificently against the Korthax, but they were one empire, relatively small in the galactic view. There are larger threats out there. The Zathari Collective, the Void Reapers, the Crimson Tide. How would humanity perform against truly powerful enemies? Pierce thought carefully before answering. General, I won't claim Earth is invincible. We're new to space and we have much to learn, but here's what I know about humans. We adapt. We've survived ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts, and countless wars. Every time we face extinction, we find a way to survive and come back stronger. So if the galaxy has bigger threats, we'll find a way to deal with them too. Even if it means more war, especially if it means more war, because that's one thing humans are very, very good at. The celebration continued late into the night, but for the human military personnel it was bittersweet. They had won a battle and saved a civilization. They had established humanity as a real force in galactic politics, but they also knew this was just the beginning. 6 months passed. The political situation in the galactic sector had changed dramatically. The Allied Worlds Coalition now had 23 member species. Earth's military served as the backbone of its defense forces. The Korthax Dominion had collapsed into civil war. Their conquered territories were being liberated one by one. But success had brought new problems. In the Strategic Command Center on Earth, Admiral Pierce faced a room full of military and political leaders. The holographic display showed a map of the galaxy with threat levels marked in different shades of red. We have a problem, Pierce began. The Zathari Collective has been watching us carefully. They've classified humanity as a Category 7 threat. That's their highest military ranking. They're worried that we're building an empire. General Linda Shaw from the Army leaned forward. Are we? That's what we're here to decide, Pierce replied. The Zathari sent us a formal message. They want to understand our intentions and our limits. They're also warning us that they won't allow aggressive expansion. Commodore Helen Briggs had been promoted and given command of the Third Fleet. She spoke up. With respect, Admiral, the Zathari Collective controls 40 star systems through what they call protective governance. That's just empire with a nicer name. Agreed, Pierce said. But they have 200 warships and a population of 60 billion. We need to be careful. The meeting lasted for hours as they debated strategy and policy, but the main question remained unanswered. What kind of power did humanity want to be in the galaxy? Jake Morrison had been promoted too. He now served as a strategic analyst, and he had been studying this question for months. He had compiled historical data from dozens of species, looking for patterns in how civilizations rose and fell. Admiral, if I may, Jake interrupted during a quiet moment. I've been studying galactic history for the past 6 months. I found something interesting. Pierce nodded for him to continue. Every major empire in galactic history has followed the same pattern. They expand through conquest or economic control. They claim they're bringing order and civilization. Eventually, they collapse under their own weight. The Korthax were just the latest example. But there's another pattern, one that's much rarer. Jake brought up new data on the display. It showed information about a species called the Guardians who had existed 3,000 years ago. The Guardians were militarily powerful, but they made a different choice. They didn't conquer. They defended. They had what they called the protection doctrine. Any species that asked for help could get it. But the Guardians never occupied territory. They never demanded payment. They never forced their government on others. What happened to them? General Shaw asked. They lasted for 800 years. Then they voluntarily disbanded when they felt they were no longer needed. They're still remembered as heroes across the galaxy. I propose we adopt something similar. Admiral Pierce studied the data carefully. A protection doctrine. We fight when asked, but we don't conquer. We help rebuild, but we don't occupy. We show strength, but we don't force our will on others. It matches human values, Commodore Briggs added. We've always done better as defenders and protectors. When we've tried to be conquerors, we've failed both morally and practically. The discussion continued, but a consensus began to form. Humanity would offer its military strength to those who needed protection. But it would not become an empire. It would be the galaxy's answer to bullies, not a bully itself. 3 weeks later, the decision was made official. They called it the Deathworld Doctrine. It was presented to the Allied Worlds Coalition and sent to every known civilization in the sector. The rules were simple. First, humanity would respond to real requests for military help from any species facing aggression. Second, human forces would never occupy territory beyond what was needed for immediate defense. Third, all species had the right to govern themselves. Humanity would not force its political systems on others. Fourth, humanity would share defensive military technology with allies, but only defensive systems. Fifth, any species that attacked human allies would face the full power of the Deathworld fleet. The Zathari Collective responded within days. A delegation arrived at Earth, led by High Coordinator Zenthar. The being looked like a floating jellyfish with glowing patterns on its body. "Your Deathworld doctrine is acceptable," Zenthar said through a translation device. "But we must verify your honesty. There is a situation in the Outer Rim. A species called the Void Reapers are attacking the Telpori people. The Telpori are not members of any alliance. They are simply farmers and artists with no capacity for defense. And you want us to help them," Pierce said, "to prove we're not just protecting our allies." "Exactly. The Zathari Collective will watch. If you are true to your doctrine, perhaps we can work together instead of competing." Admiral Pierce didn't hesitate. "Send us the coordinates. The fleet will leave immediately." The Battle of Telpor 4 became famous in galactic history. The Void Reapers were a nomadic species that survived by raiding farm worlds. They had attacked Telpor 4 expecting easy plunder. Instead, they met Commodore Helen Briggs and the Third Fleet. The battle lasted less than 3 hours. The Void Reapers fought with savage intensity, but they had never faced an enemy like humans. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez led a marine assault that captured the Reaper flagship intact. This gave valuable intelligence about their operations. But what happened after the battle mattered most. True to the Deathworld doctrine, human forces didn't occupy Telpor 4. Instead, they helped the Telpori rebuild. They provided defensive technology. They trained a local defense force. Within weeks, the human fleet left. They left behind only a small team of advisors at the Telpori's request. The Zathari observers were impressed. 3 months later, a historic meeting happened on a neutral space station. Admiral Pierce met with High Coordinator Zenthar and representatives from 15 major galactic powers. The Zathari Collective recognizes the United Earth government as a legitimate protector civilization, Zenthar announced. "We propose a formal agreement. We will not interfere with human defensive operations in this sector. In return, humanity will respect Zathari territory and interests." It was the beginning of what historians would later call the Galactic Peace Accord. It was an informal network of agreements that stabilized a large part of the galaxy. Humanity wasn't the strongest military power, but it had become the most reliable. Back on Earth, there was a quiet ceremony. The veterans of the Vela Prime campaign received honors from both human and alien governments. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez stood at attention as the Velan ambassador pinned the Star of Valor to her uniform again. "You know," she said quietly to Jake Morrison, who stood nearby, "when I joined the Marines, I thought I'd spend my career guarding embassies and running training exercises. I never imagined I'd be fighting aliens to save other aliens." Jake smiled. "That's humanity. We're full of surprises. Do you think it will last? The peace, I mean. The doctrine. As long as we remember why we created it. We're not the galaxy's police force. We're its emergency response team. We show up when called, do the job, and go home. The moment we start thinking we know better than everyone else, the moment we start forcing our will, we become just another empire." Amy nodded thoughtfully. "A Deathworld species choosing to be protectors instead of conquerors. That has to be a first in galactic history." 5 years had passed since humanity answered the Velan distress call. The galaxy was a different place now. Species that had lived in fear of aggressive empires could breathe easier. They knew that help was available if they needed it. Pirates and raiders found their activities stopped as human patrol fleets made their presence known throughout the sector. The Korthax dominion was gone, broken into small territories that were slowly healing from centuries of oppression. The species they had enslaved were rebuilding their civilizations with help from the Allied Worlds Coalition. But perhaps most importantly, other species were reconsidering their own approaches to conflict. The Corellian Unity had established their own defense forces, learning from human tactics and training methods. The Draxians, freed from Korthax rule, were rebuilding with a new focus on being able to defend themselves. Even the Zathari Collective was reforming their protective governance into something more voluntary, something their subjects actually wanted. Admiral Pierce stood on the bridge of Earth's newest ship, the Guardian. The vessel was massive, the largest humanity had ever built. Around him, the crew represented not just humanity but a dozen allied species working together. A Velan navigator sat next to a human pilot. A Draxian engineer worked alongside human technicians. A Corellian tactical officer coordinated with human weapons specialists. This was the future Pierce had hoped for. Not human dominance, but human cooperation. "Admiral," Commodore Briggs called from the communications station. "We're receiving a distress call from the Hentar system. A species called the Vecnari are under attack by unknown aggressors." Pierce felt that familiar surge of purpose. "What do we know about the Vecnari?" "Not much, sir. They're not part of the coalition. In fact, we've had minimal contact with them. They're known to be isolationists who prefer to avoid galactic politics. And now they're calling for help," Pierce said. "That means they're desperate. Set course for Hentar system. Maximum speed. Alert the 3rd and 5th fleets to join us." As the Guardian's engines engaged, Jake Morrison reviewed the limited information they had on the Vecnari. They were an aquatic species that lived on ocean worlds. They had developed space travel but had chosen to remain isolated, content with their own company. For them to break that isolation and call for help meant the threat was serious. The journey took 2 days. When the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, they found a battle already in progress. The Vecnari had 12 defense platforms orbiting their homeworld. All of them were damaged or destroyed. 40 enemy ships were advancing on the planet, their weapons firing indiscriminately at the surface. "Identification on the attackers?" Pierce asked. Lieutenant Commander Sam Foster, the tactical officer, studied his displays. "Unknown configuration, Admiral. They don't match any species in our database. Their technology appears to be a mix of different civilizations, pirates maybe, or scavengers." "Hail them." A face appeared on the view screen that made several bridge crew members flinch. The being was clearly cybernetic, more machine than organic. Its voice was distorted, mechanical. "Human vessels, this does not concern you. The Vecnari have resources we require. Leave now, or share their fate." Pierce kept his expression neutral. "This is Admiral Richard Pierce of the United Earth Defense Force. The Vecnari have requested assistance under the Deathworld doctrine. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully." The cybernetic being laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "We know of your doctrine, human. We also know your fleet is smaller than ours. You cannot win this fight. You have 30 seconds to withdraw," Pierce repeated. "We do not run from primitives." The communication cut off. Pierce counted down the seconds in his head. When 30 seconds elapsed, he gave the order. "All ships engage. Priority targets are their weapon systems. Try to disable rather than destroy. I want prisoners for questioning." The Guardian led the charge. Human ships had improved significantly in 5 years. They were faster, tougher, and their weapons were more sophisticated. But more importantly, humans had learned from every battle they had fought. They had adapted their tactics based on facing different enemies with different strategies. The enemy ships fought with a chaotic brutality that suggested they were indeed pirates or mercenaries. Their formations were loose, their coordination poor. They relied on overwhelming firepower rather than tactical skill. "These aren't professional military forces," Commodore Briggs observed. "They're raiders who got lucky finding an undefended target." "Their luck just ran out," Pierce replied. The battle was short and decisive. Human ships moved in coordinated groups, covering each other and exploiting every gap in the enemy formation. Missiles and railgun fire disabled enemy vessels with precision strikes. Within an hour, 30 of the 40 enemy ships had been destroyed or captured. The remaining 10 fled into deep space. "Pursuit, sir?" Foster asked. "Negative. Our priority is the Vecnari. Get medical and engineering teams down to the surface. I want damage assessments and casualty reports as soon as possible." On the surface of the Vecnari homeworld, the situation was grim. The raiders had bombarded several coastal cities before the human fleet arrived. Thousands were dead or injured. Infrastructure was damaged. But the Vecnari themselves surprised the human responders. Dr. Christine Palmer led the medical team that landed in the largest affected city. She found the Vecnari already organizing relief efforts despite their injuries. They were efficient, methodical, and remarkably calm given the circumstances. "Your people are very resilient," Christine told the Vecnari leader, a being named Corleth. "Most species we've helped have been in shock after an attack like this." Corleth's translator converted his clicks and whistles into understandable speech. We Vecnari do not believe in wasted emotion. What is done is done. Now we must repair and prepare for the future. We thank you for your assistance, humans. We were wrong to isolate ourselves. You're welcome, Christine said. We're setting up field hospitals and bringing in supplies. Is there anything specific you need? Understanding, Corleth replied. We wish to understand why you came. We are not your allies. We have given you nothing. Why risk your lives for strangers? Christine thought about how to answer. Because that's what the Deathworld doctrine means. Anyone who calls for help gets it. We don't ask for payment. We don't demand alliances. We just help because it's the right thing to do. This doctrine of yours, Corleth said thoughtfully. It is unusual. Most powerful species seek to expand their influence, not give it away freely. Humanity learned the hard way that conquest doesn't work. We've tried it before on our own world, and it always ended badly. We came to space hoping to be better. Word of the Vecnari rescue spread quickly through the galaxy. It reinforced what many species were beginning to believe. Humanity meant what it said. The Deathworld doctrine wasn't propaganda or a trick. It was real, but not everyone was happy about it. 3 months after the Vecnari incident, Earth received a concerning message. It came from a coalition of smaller empires who called themselves the Sovereignty League. They claimed that human interference was disrupting the natural order of the galaxy. The strong have always ruled the weak, their message stated. Your doctrine upsets this balance. You protect those who should learn to protect themselves or accept their fate. This cannot continue. The message was effectively a threat, though carefully worded to avoid being an outright declaration of war. Admiral Pierce called an emergency meeting of the coalition leadership. They're testing us, General Shaw said. They want to see if we'll back down when faced with multiple enemies instead of one. How many ships does the Sovereignty League have? Pierce asked. Jake Morrison had been compiling intelligence. Combined fleet strength is approximately 300 warships. They're spread across 5 empires, though. Getting them to coordinate would be difficult, but not impossible, Pierce said. And 300 ships is more than we've ever faced before. What are our options? Commodore Briggs asked. We could negotiate, suggested Ambassador Trelevan, who was attending via hologram. Perhaps reach some kind of accommodation that satisfies their concerns. Pierce shook his head. If we negotiate from a position that looks like weakness, we invite more aggression. Every bully in the galaxy will think they can threaten us into backing down. Then what do you propose? Trelevan asked. We call their bluff, Pierce said. We make it clear that the Deathworld doctrine is non-negotiable, and we prepare for the possibility that they might actually be foolish enough to attack. The response from Earth was short and direct. Humanity acknowledged the concerns of the Sovereignty League, but reaffirmed its commitment to the Deathworld doctrine. Any species that requested help would receive it. Any species that attacked coalition members or human allies would face appropriate consequences. The message ended with a simple statement that would become famous across the galaxy. Humanity did not ask to be the galaxy's protector. We accepted that responsibility because no one else would. If the Sovereignty League wishes to challenge that decision, we invite them to try, but they should remember what happened to the Korthax Dominion when they made the same mistake. 10 years had passed since the first Velan distress call. The Allied Worlds Coalition had grown to include 47 species. Humanity's role as the primary military power was now firmly established, but it had evolved in ways no one had initially predicted. The Guardian floated in orbit above a planet called New Haven. It was one of dozens of refugee worlds that had been established to house populations displaced by aggressive empires. Humans, Velans, Draxians, and 20 other species worked together on the surface, building cities and farms. It was a symbol of what the galaxy could be when people chose cooperation over conflict. Admiral Pierce had retired 2 years ago, replaced by Admiral Kate Sullivan. She was younger, more energetic, but she shared Pierce's commitment to the Deathworld doctrine. Today she stood on the Guardian's bridge, reviewing reports from across human-controlled space. Admiral, incoming transmission from Earth Command, Lieutenant Foster reported. Priority Alpha. Kate straightened in her chair. Priority Alpha meant something big was happening. Put it through. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to General Linda Shaw, now the head of Earth's military operations. Admiral Sullivan, we have a situation. The Crimson Tide has begun a major military offensive in the Beta sector. They've already conquered 3 systems and are advancing on a 4th. The species in their path are requesting immediate assistance. Kate felt her stomach tighten. The Crimson Tide was one of the galaxy's major threats. They were a hive mind species that absorbed conquered populations into their collective consciousness. Every war they won made them stronger. They had been quiet for decades, but now they were moving again. "How many ships do they have in this offensive?" Kate asked. "Latest intelligence suggests 500 warships plus support vessels. They're moving faster than any previous Crimson Tide campaign. We think they've been planning this for years." 500 ships. It was the largest enemy force humanity had ever faced. The entire human fleet numbered only 200 warships, though they could call on allied forces for support. "What are our orders, General?" "The Coalition Council is meeting now. But realistically, Admiral, you know what they're going to say. We made a promise. The Deathworld doctrine doesn't have exceptions for when the enemy is too big." Kate nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll begin fleet mobilization immediately. We'll need every ship we can get." Over the next week, the greatest military force in human history assembled. 200 Earth warships plus another 150 vessels from allied species. The Valens contributed their science ships, now equipped with experimental weapons. The Draxians sent their newly built battle cruisers. Even the isolationist Vecnari contributed 20 vessels, their way of repaying the debt from a decade ago. Commodore Jake Morrison commanded a carrier group in the assembled fleet. He had come a long way from being a lieutenant on the Valiant. Now he was responsible for 3 carriers and their escort vessels. On his flagship, the Defender, he reviewed tactical plans with his senior officers. "The Crimson Tide uses swarm tactics," he explained. "They sacrifice ships without hesitation because every loss is just a temporary setback for the hive mind. They'll try to overwhelm us with numbers." "Then we need to be smarter, not just stronger," suggested Commander Beth Cooper, his tactical officer. "We use our maneuverability advantage. Hit and run. Make them chase us, spread them out, then hit weak points." "Exactly." "And we target their command vessels. The hive mind needs relays to coordinate over long distances. Take those out, and their swarm becomes disorganized." Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, now a colonel commanding the Guardians Marine contingent, had a different concern. "What about ground operations?" "The Crimson Tide doesn't just conquer territory. They assimilate populations. If they've already taken 3 systems, there could be millions of people already absorbed into the collective." "Intelligence suggests the assimilation process takes time," Jake said. "If we can liberate those systems quickly, we might be able to reverse it. But that's a big if." The fleet departed 2 days later, 350 ships jumping to faster-than-light travel in perfect synchronization. It was the largest military operation in human history, and possibly the most important. They arrived in the Beta sector to find the Crimson Tide already engaged with the local defense forces. A species called the Mentari were making a brave stand with their 30 remaining ships against a Crimson Tide force of 200 vessels. They were losing badly. "All ships attack Formation Delta," Admiral Sullivan ordered. "We hit them hard and fast. Show them what a Deathworld fleet can do." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for generations. The human and allied forces didn't try to match the Crimson Tide's numbers. Instead, they used speed and coordination. Human ships darted in and out of the enemy formation, their weapons targeting the larger command vessels. Allied ships provided supporting fire and electronic warfare, disrupting Crimson Tide communications. Jake's carrier group launched fighters that swarmed around Crimson Tide warships like angry insects. The fighters were small, fast, and piloted by humans who had trained for years in Earth's atmosphere. They flew with a skill that the hive mind collective couldn't match. "Target the relay ships," Jake ordered. "Everyone we take down reduces their coordination." The Defender's weapons fired in steady rhythm. Missiles streaked across space, each one guided by advanced targeting systems. Railgun rounds punched through Crimson Tide armor with devastating effect. Around them, the rest of the fleet was doing the same. But the Crimson Tide was learning. The hive mind adapted quickly, redirecting forces to protect the relay ships. The battle turned into a grinding slugfest as both sides took heavy losses. "We've lost 12 ships," Commander Cooper reported. "Another 20 are heavily damaged. Casualty reports? Over 1,000 dead, 3,000 wounded." Jake felt each loss like a physical blow. These weren't just numbers on a screen. They were people he knew, friends he had served with. But he couldn't let emotion cloud his judgment. Continue the attack. We're hurting them worse than they're hurting us. He was right. The Crimson Tide had lost over 80 ships, nearly half their force in this sector. But more importantly, they had lost 15 of their 20 relay vessels. The coordination of their swarm was breaking down. "Admiral Sullivan to all ships," came the fleet-wide broadcast. "The Crimson Tide is retreating. Pursue and destroy. We end this now." The human fleet gave chase, but Admiral Sullivan was careful not to overextend. The Crimson Tide might be retreating, but they were still dangerous. The pursuit lasted 3 days as the enemy fled deeper into space, abandoning the systems they had conquered. On the 4th day, the Crimson Tide did something unexpected. They sent a communication. "Human Admiral Sullivan." The hive mind's voice was thousands of voices speaking in unison. "We acknowledge your strength. We propose a cessation of hostilities. We will withdraw from Beta Sector and return all absorbed populations if you agree not to pursue us further." Kate considered this carefully. The Crimson Tide had never negotiated before. They had always fought to the last ship. This was unprecedented. "Why are you offering this?" she asked. "The Hive calculates that continued conflict with humanity is inefficient. You are willing to accept losses that other species will not. You adapt quickly. You fight with emotion but think with logic. You are unpredictable. We cannot efficiently predict your actions, which makes you too dangerous to engage." Kate smiled grimly. "In other words, we're too much trouble." "Correct. We seek easier prey." "You are not easy prey. Here are my terms," Kate said. "You return all absorbed populations immediately. You provide medical assistance to reverse the assimilation process. You provide reparations to the Mentari and other affected species. And you never enter Beta Sector again. If we catch you breaking any of these terms, we won't just drive you away. We'll hunt you across the galaxy until the Crimson Tide is nothing but a memory." There was a long pause. Then the hive mind responded, "Your terms are acceptable. We will comply." Over the following months, the Crimson Tide kept their word. Millions of people were returned to their homeworlds, their minds freed from the collective. The process was painful and not everyone fully recovered, but most did. The species that had been attacked received compensation and help rebuilding. The victory was celebrated across the coalition, but Kate knew the cost had been high. They had lost 37 ships and over 3,000 personnel. Each one was a person who had believed in the Deathworld doctrine enough to risk everything. A memorial service was held on Earth. Kate stood before a wall inscribed with the names of the fallen. Beside her stood Jake, Amy, and Dr. Christine Palmer, who had worked tirelessly to save the wounded. "They gave their lives protecting people they had never met," Kate said during her speech. "They died so that strangers on worlds they had never visited could live free. That is the essence of the Deathworld doctrine. Not conquest, not glory, just the simple belief that innocent people deserve to be protected." After the ceremony, the old guard gathered in a quiet room. Jake, Amy, Christine, and several others who had been there from the beginning with the Velan rescue. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" Amy asked. "All the fighting, all the